Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Stacey together again. The bathroom floor is where Stacey found herself when her slow descent into a special kind of mental hell began, culminating in a checking out of sorts. The chaos and exhaustion of her 15-year marriage had taken its toll, her disintegration disrupting the lives of her boys who needed her more than ever. It's taken years for her to dissect the pieces of her dysfunctional puzzle, confirming that it wasn't just one event, but many which sent her down the rabbit hole. Grateful that she's still around to share her story in this extraordinary book of very personal essays, Stacey shows us how ignoring mental health issues can lead to some serious shit. My guest today is Stacey Powells, the author of Empty Cupboards, her book of personal essays that are so profound, I cannot urge you enough to pick up this book. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you, Patricia, so much for having me.
Your story is a tale of survival, and this book excerpts highlights your mental breakdown. But the book starts out with stories about earlier in your life. Empty Cupboards, the title, plays a huge role in your transformation. Can you explain the actual breakdown you had in 2001 and how it led to writing this book?
So in 2001, my life had just become unmanageable. And um, a 15-year marriage that was really, really stressful, not only because my ex-husband was a substance abuser, alcohol, but what had happened to him 4 months after we were married was pretty awful. I'm going to give you a very short version. I took him to the hospital because he broke his leg on September 7th, 1984. The cast that the hospital put on his leg burned his leg. It's called an exothermic reaction. And when he woke up from the surgery, because it was a compound fracture, they had to put the bone back in and sew it up. That half splinter cast burned the leg. And when he woke up, he was screaming that my leg is on fire, my leg is on fire. But because he was drunk, the medical staff just kept putting morphine and Demerol into his system. 6 days later, the cast comes off, and the back of his leg from his thigh all the way down to the bottom of his heel is all black. So our marriage was this leg thing. He had to have around 13, 14 surgeries to try and repair the damage, skin grafts. He couldn't wear a cast. So they put a Hoffman device on the leg, which is drilling pins below and above the break. He lost his acting career. His substance abuse got worse. We got pregnant in between the surgeries. So I'm trying to juggle a full-time job, taking care of him, taking care of the kids. And after 15 years of this, I had had enough, and I asked for a divorce probably 7 years after I was emotionally already out of the marriage. A lot of women and men who finally get divorced have already been out of it emotionally for a long time. But it took me 7 years. And then I lost my job at Paramount Pictures. That story is also in the book. And my brain just shut down. And there was that one day where I had dropped the kids off to school, and I was walking up the stairs to my office, and excuse me, sat down on the stairs and thought, if there was a gun in the house right now, sorry, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
If there was a gun in the house right now, somebody else would be picking up my kids from school.
That's how far down you fell.
Yes. Yes. It was pretty terrifying.
Now, that was just, you sat down on the stairs, and that was what was like, was there feelings leading up to it, but it was just this one profound
It
awakening
was
that
it
happened.
was one thing on top of another on top of another. I think the 15-year marriage was the icing on the cake, but then there was more icing on the cake, losing the job at Paramount Pictures, not due to anything I did, but due to a person. But these stories started really when I was in my mom's belly, and the stress that she and my father were experiencing during that time. I was an accident. My mother has told me that if abortion was legal in 1959, I wouldn't be here, nor would my sister. So there is that. And a lot of these stories are moments that happened to me that kind of compounded what actually led to the breakdown. I really feel that it's not just one thing that leads to breakdowns. I think it's a whole bunch of things. And we are as a society, especially as women, we are expected to carry so much on our shoulders. And our bodies are the ones that have to tell us enough. And it was my body and my brain telling me enough.
You had a very chaotic childhood, based on the stories. I'm not saying it's okay, and I'm in no way justifying it. Unfortunately, a lot of us dealt with many of those same things in the 60s and 70s. And we'll, continue to talk about that. But what was your normal, and how did that shape you then and now?
So it was normal to sweep things under the rug. I mean, my family was very, very good. They get sweeping under the rug 101, A plus, because we didn't talk about things like mental health. There were a lot of conversations, when we would walk in the room, all of a sudden the adults would stop talking, that kind of thing. And I didn't find out until within the last 5 years that my grandmother, Toby, who had suffered a lot of trauma in her life, had two mental breakdowns, and was actually, excuse me, was actually institutionalized. And I just found out a couple days ago that she actually had the what's the electro
Electroshock therapy.
the shock therapy. And I found out another cousin had I mean, my cousins are reading this book and they're going, "Oh my God, did you know the story of," because our family is big. We have a huge family. We're finding more and more cousins because of ancestry. That's a whole
Yeah,
other story.
sure.
Yeah, because my grandfather couldn't keep it in his pants. That's a whole other story. Um, but the mental health issues that are just kind of swirling around were all kept quiet. And so it was normal for me to just, everything's fine. Everything's fine. We don't talk about stuff that happens because everything's fine. And that's how I grew up. And that's how my mother is. And she still is like that. And she has said
Mhm.
to me, she said, I had so much trauma in my young life because she lost her father at a young age. Her brother died of cancer, and she wasn't even told until 2 days before he died that he had cancer.
Oh my
She was just
God.
told that he's sick. And all of a sudden, she's going to go visit him in a hospital, and he's dead 2 days later. So she told me she learned to just not get attached, that to if something horrible happens, just to ignore it and put it away and let it go. And she, my entire life, she's was never institutionalized, but she would blow about two or three times a year. Things would just add up and she would just go and yell and scream. And sometimes she would take off and drive, and for days, we wouldn't see her. But the fact that it was normal for us to not talk about it is so abnormal in today's world,
Oh
because
yeah.
we have to talk about it. We have to talk about things that are not doing well in our lives. We have to be able to have that touchstone, whether it's a psychologist or a group of people or a best friend or a husband or whoever, somebody that we can call at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, help.
Right. You discuss at length that you were an unwanted child, and that it kept coming up. Not just because you felt that way, but your parents were open about it to you. So your entrance into the world squelched their dreams, especially your father wanting to leave LA, but then he couldn't. And is that was what your driving force was that did you somehow inherit the mantras to get out of LA as soon as I can? Do you
You
think that
know,
came from his not wanting to be there?
my father brought us up here to the Eastern Sierra a lot when we were growing up, and this is where he wanted to live.
Okay.
My mother refused to leave the city. My mother refused to leave her mother. Even though her and her mother had a love-hate relationship, she wouldn't leave her. And my dad, he suffered, he smothered himself with his own sense of responsibility.
Uh-huh.
His parents were very much, you suck it up, you don't get divorced, you do what's right, no matter what you're feeling. And I, being an asthmatic since I was 2 years old, that my asthma got worse and worse the older I got and the smoggier LA got. And I knew I wanted to get out of there. I knew I didn't want to live in the city. And I
Mhm.
do remember when Paramount Pictures let me, I had this fabulous boss. I still say he's my boss, Ridge Walker.
Mhm.
And when I came to him saying, you know what, I said, I was working on the Arsenio Hall show at the time, the first one. And I said, my asthma is getting worse. I said, I need to get out of here. I said, do you think Paramount will let me move and keep my job? And he just kind of put his cigarette out and thought for a second. He goes, write it up and we'll see. And that was in February of 1992. Well, by April 1992, he came back to me and said, you're not going to believe it. Paramount is letting you move and keep your job, because I was licensing music, and it was phone, fax, and computer back then. And so we moved to Mammoth Lakes. And when I told my father, he was at the pharmacy in Beverly Hills, I said, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "Paramount is letting me move to Mammoth and keeping my job." Literally, Patricia, I have never seen the man cry. He was in his pharmacy and started crying. And at that time, I had no idea he had prostate cancer, because here we go again.
Wouldn't tell you.
They kept it from me. He found out he had prostate cancer in 1989. And instead of curing it, like taking the thing out, he tried to cure it homeopathically, shark cartilage, I mean, you name it. And he succumbed to it in 1993. But this is where he wanted to be. And maybe part of me is here still because I'm paying homage to my dad.
Did you bury him up there?
He was cremated, which
Okay.
is very anti-Jewish religion, but he was very, he was agnostic. Part of his ashes are up here. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I had to put the ashes way back in the Sierra so they wouldn't end up in the water that comes from here that goes back to Los Angeles, because it would have been really horrible.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Stacey, one's identity often gets wrapped up in the most profound events of our life. You know, you and I are the same age, and it astounds me that we could not or would not tell our parents about abuses, bullying. We had to hold in all the fears and anxiety we had facing us every single day. So you dealt with that at home, at school, wherever you went. You know, the girl who wasn't the cheerleader, who wasn't the homecoming queen, myself included. That, you know, we went from not having that we're failures or that we're worthless. It's amazing that our self-worth was never encouraged as children. So I'm curious, how do you view your place in the world? You know, how did you view your place in the world as a young person compared to now as a fully formed adult? Have you arrived? Are
Oh,
you?
yeah. Oh, yeah. I wish I had the brain of a 63-year-old in my 20-year-old body. You know, Katie bar the door, if that happened. Absolutely. You know, I did try out for cheerleading. I think there's a story in here called The
Yes.
Uncheerleader. And quite frankly, my boobs are too big. You know, I had no business jumping around to the Beach Boy song, I Get Around, uh,
Okay.
trying out for cheerleaders. So I stayed in the political side of high school and played volleyball. But yeah, you know, I look back and think, why didn't I say, you know, stand up for myself when those certain things happen? Like when I was in the Santa Monica Bay and I got molested behind the waves. Why didn't I scream my head off and tell the lifeguard? And when, um, and when, you know, that kiss, the 13-year-old kiss, the French kiss that I was like, I was conned at a bar mitzvah. You know, all I did was tell my mom. I think when my mom read the book, and she said it was the first time she heard that story. She said she remembers picking me up, but she doesn't remember why I called her to come home early. I may have made up some story, like I wasn't feeling good or something. You know, I don't know, 13 years old. So absolutely now. I mean, it's so important to speak up now. Speak up now. And God, if I had a nickel for all the time I said, I'm sorry and I'm fine.
You talk about your breakdown. You were on the floor in the bathroom, standing at an empty cupboard, and that's how the name of the book, Empty Cupboards, came to be. Tell us about that experience when you became so immobilized with it had to be everything: grief, fear, giving up,
Yeah.
panic,
Angst,
angst.
every, you know, why did let my life get like this? That moment when I just, uh, it was after I called my mom, when I was sitting on the stairs and thought, okay, if there was a gun in the house right now, my kids would need somebody else to pick them up at school. And then I called my mother and said, I need help. And then it just kind of boiled over. I was in the bathroom and just this guttural animal scream that didn't even sound like it was coming from me, but I just went at the cupboards for some reason. And I remember seeing the bottle of Valium floating in the toilet, still full, because opioids make me really, really sick. I can't even take them. Not good if you're in the hospital having a surgery, by the way. So it was just one of those. And she found me on the bathroom floor with just stuff everywhere. And I was, um, having a panic attack, and it was almost like I was looking out at my it's like I left my body for a second to look at what I was doing. It's hard to explain.
Mhm.
I thought, okay, this is not who I am meant to be, but for some reason this is happening, and how am I going to fix this? And then there's that little writer's voice in the back of my head going, one day this is going to make a good story. Because as writers, it doesn't matter what's going on in our life. I don't know. With me, it is, somehow it's going to be a story,
Yeah, you
so.
figure out how you're gonna jot it down and think about it later. I do that often, yes.
And within a couple of weeks of that big breakdown is when I started writing the stories, because I thought it's got to be it can't just be this one thing, even though my marriage was so stressful, and raising two boys. I highly recommend do not having a nervous breakdown. Do not have one when you're raising two boys, teenagers on your own. Not a good time for them, not a good time for you. It had to have started earlier. I just something, maybe it was my muse, maybe it was my spiritual writing tribe, I don't know, but I just started writing these stories, and I started with the I should have story when I got molested in the Santa Monica Bay.
You talk so much in your stories. Again, Empty Cupboards is a collection of essays, and it has a timeline
Mhm.
from Stacey's childhood through her young adulthood, teens, young adulthood, and now into midlife, and all of the things that happen in our lives that shape us and mold us. But now we're finding is we unable to handle our own mental unwellness, keep repeating behaviors or acting out or reaching out to people to help us and fix us because we were never allowed to do that as children. One thing that stuck out for me is you traveled a lot and had quite a few adventures in your college years, and you almost married a hot guy that drove a blue Datsun 280Z. Does everyone remember that? I might add. But you broke it off in the nick of time. I want to commend you for having the foresight at that time. And the reason I bring it up is you could have married him and went off on another destructive tangent. What moment of lucidity was going on for you at that time?
Well, Danny and I had gotten in, we met in college and we gotten engaged, and had our ups and downs, of course, mostly due to me, you know. And then we decided that we were going to get married the summer of 1981, and I was going to go to Europe. I wanted to go to Europe with my girlfriend and have a last hurrah, and then he was going to, date or whatever, and then we are going to come back, and we had everything like set up. I had the dress, Calabasas Inn, the caterers, the whole thing. We were going to get married that August. And I went to Europe. I was there for 4 months, and, jumped around, met a lot of guys, did whatever young girls do when they meet a lot of guys. And I was very protective, all that kind of stuff. But I came back, and he still is a really, really nice guy, just a nice, stable guy. And I knew deep in my gut and in my heart that I wasn't ready to be monogamous. I was not ready to be a one man woman. And so I remember that sitting, having him come over, and he sat on my parents' backyard. And I told him, I said, I'm just not ready to get married. I cannot promise I'm going to be monogamous. And I write about it in the book. And I still to this day can see his face. And he dated this woman for a little while I was in Europe. He dated her. And then, she was there waiting for him when I broke off, and they've been married ever since. And she's a nice gal, and he's just a nice guy. And I just knew that I wasn't done, messing around, just for lack of a better phrase.
I just want to nitpick this because we all go back, and I got married very late in our age group standards. I didn't get married till I was 37. And people say to me, "Oh, how you must have broke a lot of hearts." And I didn't. It just they never seemed like fit. But
Mhm.
again, this is what I want, which leads into the next thing is that you're very candid in your book throughout for years and years and years about dysfunctional relationships
Yeah.
with men and women, both romantic and platonic.
Mhm.
And at what point did you put together that it's you, that these relationships are dysfunctional because of the choices you're making?
Mhm. Probably after my breakdown, and I was on Celexa and Wellbutrin to numb me out. Um, I realized I looked back at the men I was dating right after the divorce, which I should never have done. I kept looking for love in all the wrong places. And if we want to get all psychological about it, it was probably because my dad was unavailable. Completely unavailable. I mean, my brother and I were just talking the other day. We had never had, my dad and I never had an intense conversation about anything. The only time he had a conversation with me was when I was working at the pharmacy with him one day, and we were driving home on the 405. He's in the yellow Jeep and he turns to me. I was 15. He turns to me and goes, "Don't get pregnant." I'm like, okay, that was it. My brother, the same thing. He never had an intense conversation with my father, although my dad and my brother would go to the Saugus swap meet almost every
Okay.
Sunday. They would do that. My dad was just very locked in and very emotional and available. So my choices with men probably had something to do with that. My first husband was nothing like my dad. He wasn't, he didn't have he was an actor. He was doing really well up until the leg break thing. But he just was a whole different animal. And so, it just took me a long time I read something somewhere about the patterns in our relationships, and I can't remember where I read it, but it clicked with me. It clicked that, oh my gosh, I have this pattern of, bringing unavailable, kind of abusive, either mentally or physically, men in my life, and I'm going to stop it right now. And that was kind of around the time that I had the breakdown. That also contributed to it because a couple things happened, with men just preceding the breakdown too. So, yeah, it was an aha moment to stop the pattern. To really stop the pattern.
You mentioned earlier, and I think many of us have experienced this, especially women our age, that mental health was not discussed in our house.
Mhm.
If you had a mental health issue, you were crazy, and no one in our family's crazy, so we're not going to own that. The medications and the treatments used in those days were barbaric by
Mhm.
today's standards. Um, but in your um, universe at that time, how did you deal with, or how did you process, or where did you place those feelings when crazy was going on right in front of you and there was nothing you could do about it? Watching the interaction of your parents, asking your parents normal, healthy questions and getting shut down, or
Mhm.
getting a response that's so far off from what you were looking for. I'm curious how you process those feelings at that time.
I ignored them and distraction. I was very, very busy.
Okay.
I made sure I was
Right.
extremely busy with
Mhm.
school. I used to horseback ride, a lot of friends during that time. And I still have a lot of friends and I still distract myself, but I distract myself. I distract myself and I don't let mental health issues get swept under the rug anymore. And I'm very, very lucky. My second and final husband, Dan, he's very understanding and he knows everything. I handed him the manuscript to this book first before anybody else saw it. I just handed it to him and I said, "Hey, don't judge me.
Okay.
Here,
Yeah.
this is the book." And so he read it and he's like, "Yeah, it's pretty intense stories." But he knows my history and I know too now. The thing is, I can feel my brain chemistry changing almost. I can feel it kind of do this kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I'm sure menopause has a little bit to do with that, maybe a lot to do with that. But I'm 12 years in, so hopefully it'll start going away sometime. When I do feel that, I don't anymore, I don't panic thinking I'm going to go back to where I was in 2001. I take care of myself. I'll say to my husband, I say, "Look, I feel this thing happening. I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to read. I'm going to walk because I don't want to talk to you right now. Not because I don't love you, but because whatever is going to come out of my mouth is going to be mean and you don't deserve that." And there's been a few times though where I've actually, done a thing and left and say, "I got to go. I just got to get on the road." So for me, being alone and on the road and by the ocean and just driving also kind of calms things down. And I can be in the car and listen to my Native American music and just and sort things out in my head. So that is really important for me is to have alone time.
So you're balancing that. You have your family around you, you have the time with your husband, and I guess to some degree, some extended family, and then you are healthy about choosing your alone time to be by yourself for the spiritual cleansing.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Stacey Powells is our guest. She's the author of Empty Cupboards, an analysis of the breakdown of a commonsensical, menopausing Leo living in high altitude where oxygen is scant. I love that. the story of one woman's mental breakdown and how she healed herself through going back and gathering up the pieces of her life that made her ill and now well again. Now, Stacey, something we all do, unfortunately, even with help, is repeat our dysfunction with our own kids. You found yourself married to a train wreck with two small kids, a stressful job, and you developed kidney cancer.
Mhm. I did. The kidney is one of the organs that responds not very well to stress. And it lies right under the adrenal gland, as you know. And I fully believe that my left kidney started going bad probably around the first 5 years of my first marriage. Renal cell carcinoma is a very slow growing cancer. And it was just by accident that we kind of found it. A lot of them are by accident. And I say we because my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, I was kind of leaning over on the bed. We were talking, and this thing popped out under my left rib.
Oh.
Like, what the hell is that? And so, very long story short, it was a 5-pound tumor that was taken out December 18th, 2008. It was malignant. If I had waited a few more months, I wouldn't be here.
Mhm.
So, yeah, the kidney took the brunt of the stress from my first marriage and from all the other stuff that compiled over the years. And so, that's why I really, 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 really suggest to people who are experiencing any kinds of stresses or things in their life to find a way to vent, find a way to not hold on to it, because the body keeps score. I think there's a book called The Body Keeps Score, and the body does keep score.
On many levels.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, somehow you woke up and ended this disastrous marriage that led to the breakdown, rather than healing by leaving him. And you continue to seek out true love to no avail. Um, I want to talk about the sequence of events that, it led you to the downward spiral, which we talked about. But, what effect did this have on your boys? And were they aware of your deteriorating mental status?
I asked them that recently, and they said no. They just thought that I was, they were going through their own stuff. Their dad stopped communicating with them after a while. He blamed me for everything, and so he wouldn't take them when he was supposed to. My older son started getting into trouble. My younger son had come out as gay during my breakdown, and instead of me being a parent who should have said, okay, so that's fine, you're gay, I don't care, let's figure out what your resources are around for you, what things you're going to be up against, and support you any way I can into your journey. I just kind of went, oh, yeah, I kind of know that you were gay. That's no surprise to me, because when you were 18 months old, you were wearing dresses at the Paramount Daycare Center while your brother was picking up sticks and thinking they were guns. So um they didn't really pay attention too much. They were teenage boys. They just Eric would pay attention when I wasn't wearing makeup because
Uh,
he became a makeup artist, and so he would pay attention to that kind of stuff. If I was wearing something that didn't match or whatever. My older son just didn't really pay attention. He was too busy getting into some serious trouble, and that's why I said before, it's not a good idea to have a nervous breakdown when you're raising two teenage boys on your own. Not recommended at all. So now they realize what has happened. They have the book. They haven't read it yet. They've told
oh.
me. So it's up to them. It's their legacy. I mean, they're in their mid-30s, so they're gonna read it when and if they want to.
They have their own set of issues that you've blamed yourself for, and I hear you doing that still. Have you come to terms with your feelings about this?
That's a good question. It's really hard. The brain and the heart will never meet, logic and emotion. And logically, my older son is incarcerated, and he made some really, really bad choices and became a violent crystal meth addict and was abusive. And of course, I go back to that time thinking, if I had not had a breakdown and had my head up my yoo-hoo,
Mm-hmm.
would and really paid attention to what my boys needed, because their father was who he was. If I really had paid attention to that, would they have, or especially my older one, gone in the direction they have? I don't know. when they're 18, they make their own choices. They know good from bad, right from wrong. Um, there is a part of me that still feels like I could have done better. I should have done better with them. And we've talked about it. And my older one, I talk to him all the time from where he is at. And he tells me all the time, this is not your fault, Mom. He says, I made these choices. I did this. Thankfully, he seems to be turning his life around. He's been sober now for almost 5 years. He's part of the religious studies program up there, and he's going to school. He starts school soon, going to college, and he seems to be turning it around up where he's at, although he's going to be there for a really long time. My other one, my younger son, said that, I was just trying to figure out how to be gay in this world.
Hmm.
Because he didn't have any role models. His dad thought he was bi-curious and would actually tell his brother to beat the gay out of him.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I didn't know this until recently. Again, I wasn't told. It was kept secret from me. So I'm sure their dad said something like, don't tell your mother or I'll ... So, it was just a chaotic time when I didn't have it together. And looking back, I have to forgive myself for not having it together. I just might, it was just too much for me. We can only take so much, and we're all healing now. We're having the opportunity to do that. I've got a really good relationship with both my sons right now, and I say right now because there's things that come up, and
Yeah.
sometimes we won't talk for a month or something, which is fine because
Yeah.
sometimes I just need a break and they need a break from me. And but right now, today, we have a really good relationship, and I'm proud of who they've become. They've overcome a lot, especially my younger one. It's not easy to be in the LGBTQ community
Right.
right now, no matter where you live. And and he's a very, very, very staunch supporter of the LGBTQ community and the trans community and everybody. And I'm just really proud of them. And we've come through a lot.
So, Stacey, do they now, knowing what you went through and understanding mental health a little better, do you have conversations with them about mental health?
Oh, yes.
Separate and apart from the issues that the things that are volatile and are triggers for you as a family, just mental health in general, mental health wellness and things that we can do to,
When we can, when we
yeah,
do, I tell them it's so important. My son, who's a ward of the Department of Corrections, is getting help. He talks to people all the time now, and he got a certificate of not a, he's not a pastor, but whatever. I'm sorry, I don't know what it is
yeah,
when they're in prison, but he's counseling some people about their mental health. He knows he's going to need mental health and substance abuse issues his entire life, help with that. My younger one's getting there. He's getting there. He's got a partner who's got some mental health issues, and so they're working on that together. We do talk about it. I don't let things, if I have a question about something, if I see a Instagram post or a TikTok post of his that I'm concerned about, I will pick up the phone and call him and not just think to myself, oh, he's just having a bad day, I'll just let it go one day. I will pick up and go, do I need to come down there? And quite frankly, a month ago, I went down there for a week because he was nosediving for a lot of reasons. And COVID, still
yeah,
people have been so wiped out emotionally because of COVID. You don't just rise above something like that immediately. It's taking a lot of people to bounce back. And it's taking my younger son mentally a long time to bounce back. So I did go down there about a month ago and spend a week with him. We actually had a really lovely time.
good.
No arguments at all. I just kept my mouth shut and talked to him when I needed to, but helped him clean up the house. I know from my own mental breakdown, just to have somebody come over and do the laundry is a big deal
Right.
because then that little thing's out of my head. Just to have somebody come over and clean up the dog poop is a big deal. And then that thing's out of my head. So I cleaned and I cleaned and I cleaned some more, and we watched television and we went for rides to the beach, and it really helped him. And he's really good at manifesting things, and he's booked till the end of the year. He's a makeup artist,
Oh,
and
good for
um,
him.
he's
Wow.
just reorganized his energy, and we're all energy. It's all
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
energy. And so he redirected it, and now he's been working pretty steadily since I left. So that's a really good thing for him. So well, no, we talk about stuff. If stuff's going bad, I know about it, they know about it, and I have 3 stepdaughters. They're very good communicators. I'm very grateful and lucky to have Nichelle, Caitlin, and Alicia in my life,
Mhm.
my husband's daughters.
Mhm.
We all talk. I mean, it's just we have to. We can't keep it inside.
I'm so glad you're talking. I'm so glad you have family members to talk to. I just want to mention, you are had this breakdown, but you're so accomplished and you're so highly functioning in your work life. I just want to mention that you've been a published writer since 1996. You have columns and articles covering everything from parenting, balancing work, raising children solo, local news, travel, transitional life issues. So you continue to study and to learn and to reach out and to be part of the world and part of the community. So I really want to commend you for that because some of what you've been through, most people would hide in their house. And I want to tell the audience, I met you. Well, we have kind of a lot of people in common. It's always funny how there's something in the universe that brings us together. But I've listened to some of your speaking engagements previously, and you're doing great things, Stacey. And I just, want to put that out to you. I want I would like for you to touch upon the epigenetics. We're talking about that inheriting trauma
Mhm.
and how these life experiences not only inform your life and your work because of what happened to you, but it's
Mhm.
actually part of your physical being.
Yeah, epigenetics is really interesting. I can't remember how I found out about it, but I ended up with a book called "It Didn't Start with You" by Mark Wolynn, Wolynn, and it is about how scientists obviously know about DNA, but there was these DNA strands that they didn't know for a long time what they did. They just thought it was junk DNA.
Got it.
Turns out that a lot of this DNA has to do with our inherited traumas, like you said, from our ancestors. And my mom's side of the family, okay, if you have to think what life was like 4, 5, 600 years ago,
Sure.
and what our ancestors had to survive and go through so we could be here today. I mean, think about it.
Right.
The pogroms, the what is it when they Constantine, I think, did the cleansing of the Jews and everybody, everyone, I don't know,
The
all this kind of stuff.
Crusades, the ethnic cleansing, the
Crusades, that was it. Thank
Holocaust,
you.
all of
All
it.
this,
Yeah.
our great, great, great 20 times grandparents survived that
Right.
stuff. A lot of them didn't, but ours did. And so we're here, but also we're here with their traumas. So I did a lot of studying with this when my older son was first arrested, Christmas Day, 2017. It was the day he was arrested. I was like, Alex, you were this was going to happen to you because of what you're doing. 2 days later, I found out what he did. And my whole world came crashing down because there were other people involved. It wasn't just my son being stupid and doing something to himself. Other people were involved. And I'm not going to say names. I'm not going to get into it because I'm writing another book about it. Number one. Number two, I
Okay.
want to protect people here.
Yes.
And so I I thought I was going to go back into that dark hole. I cried for a year. I looked for help from anywhere. And that's where I found out about epigenetics. I was going to angel readers. I was going to mediums. I had my therapist. I had my girlfriends. It was just really, really awful because being a parent of somebody who does harm to another human being is a whole other ballgame. And I started looking up, parents of, famous serial killers and things like
Right.
that,
Right.
how they dealt with this. Although my son didn't murder anybody, it was still he did harm. And how it's just that sent me on my journey to exquisite research, is what I call it, because it has helped me. I'm a researcher, anyways, because I'm a journalist and I write, but to research stuff for my own mental health really took flight. And that's why, I mean, I have books on one book called The Psychopath Within to try to find out this. I have another book, like I said, on epigenetics. I have books on what sugar, does to the body,
Yes.
and how what we put in our body, our food, can change us chemically. And so all that together, mental health, my son's schizophrenic. So I, wanted to know about that and how that could have happened. my older son. And so there's a huge puzzle to all of us. I mean, we are all surviving something. We have all survived something. And to be on this planet right now is so extremely difficult. There's so much divisiveness. And we can not turn off the news. I mean, we can turn off the news and not listen to all this kind of stuff. But the energy, like I said earlier, of
Yes.
all of what's going on the planet is here. It seeps into us. And that's why we really have to take care of our mental health now more than ever.
I wanted to ask you, having included your friends and your family in your essays and your stories, how are they responding to this book?
Well, I changed a lot of names.
Okay. That's my,
I
was my
did.
next question. Yeah.
I changed a lot of names. My friends who've read it are all like, "Oh my God, I didn't know this happened to you. And why didn't you talk about it?" A
Right.
lot of them said, "Why didn't you tell me that this happened?" And I've known a lot of these girlfriends of mine for 50 years. And they didn't even know what was going on. And I just, shook my shoulders. It just not what I did, back then. I'm talking about it now, obviously. I'm talking about it to the world right now, globally, because I want this conversation to continue to happen globally. It has to. It's not just here us in the United States where mental health is an issue. It is all over the world. So they're fine. My mother, she claims she doesn't remember a lot of things. She says she doesn't even remember coming over and helping me when I called her that day I had the breakdown. I said, "How can you not remember that?" I mean, that was and this is again where when something traumatic happens, she just has this ability
Right.
to put it somewhere else. And that was one of the things she put somewhere else. Um, there are some family members who I haven't talked to since the book came out. I know they got it because they told me they got it. So I don't know. I mean,
And
I've
are
been
any of the stories sensationalized or fictionalized or
no, the only one's got a little creative nonfiction is the Marietta Hot Springs story.
okay.
Because my mother said to me, she goes, "I didn't do anything with that guy." I said, "Mom, I was 10 years old and you disappeared for the night." And she goes, "Well, maybe I had a fight with with my mother and I left." I said, "You left after we were at this big dance. You were dancing with this, so that's the only, thing I fictionalize that a little bit, but it's not really because it all kind of happened. I just put color into it.
Right,
Everything
right,
happened.
right.
I just colored some
Yeah.
of it, but they're all true stories. You can't make any of this stuff up.
And I
Good.
also I hadn't put this in the Q&A, but I wanted to ask you your relationship with your grandmother Toby.
Mhm.
So was she a stabilizing force, or was she somebody unreachable? Because she
She
seemed the
also,
most, just from the story, what I glean is she seemed the most together, even though she had her own traumas and whatever.
oh
She seemed
yeah, I mean,
consistent and together and stayed the course throughout her life, if you will.
she did, she did, but there was something going on with her. I mean, she cried a lot.
Mm.
She lost her parents and a lot of family members. So we all did in World War II.
Mhm.
Their neighbors turned them into the Nazis, and gratefully, she was the last one out before they closed the borders. She lost her husband, to a single car accident. My grandpa Jack fainted at the wheel. His dad was a very, very violent man and would actually beat up my grandpa Jack pretty bad, and my grandpa Jack would pass out. And he passed out one of the times driving from the Borscht Belt in Los Angeles,
Yep. Hmm.
that is, back to Camarillo where they lived, and he hit a tree and the whole thing. And then a couple of years later, her son died of cancer. And then it was my mom and her. And my mom always said to me, she felt that her mom felt the wrong child died because my mom felt the wrong parent died.
Right.
So there was that whole energy that I grew up with entirely. So, does that answer your question?
It does because, the people just feel like their whole existence of either not being wanted or that the kid who died, it should have been them. And this is heavy, heavy stuff for people to walk around
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it does go back to, when my mom got pregnant with me, she told me that my dad's parents were very upset with her that she got pregnant. And I'm thinking, well, it takes two. Hello?
Right.
It takes two. But they were extremely upset with her because my dad was still going to school. He didn't get into veterinarian school, which is what he wanted to do. And he ended up, his parents said, you got to do something. You got a wife and a baby on the way. So that's why he did pharmacology at USC. But he was going to school. He's working still. And um, that energy, it still seeps. It still really seeps. When I got pregnant with my first son, I wasn't trying, but it's kind of a funny story. Paramount Pictures and all the studios had softball teams. And so we had played Fox, I think, and we won. So we went to this place on Melrose Avenue, right near the Pacific Design Center there.
Uh-huh.
It was a barn, it was a bar. And my friend said, "Hey, you have to try, you don't like to drink, but why don't you try a Long Island iced tea?" And I'm like, they said, "You won't taste the liquor." So I had two of them. Still to this day, don't know how I got home, but did not put the birth control in. And that night I conceived my first son. And it was the month that Chernobyl went off.
Oh
So
boy. Okay.
April 1986 is when I conceived him. And so, then it was all in the middle of my ex-husband's surgeries and this kind of stuff. So I did do some research on what stresses can do, how they can change the DNA of the fetus in,
Right.
the embryo of the fetus and all that kind of stuff. So that is part of my research as to what the heck happened to my older son during the first 30 years of his life. So I just feel like we can't we can't brush things under the carpet anymore. We can't close the door on these stories. These are stories, no matter how hard they are, they have to be told and they have to be passed down. I mean, I wish to God I knew that my grandmother was institutionalized. I wish that I knew earlier that my great grandfather was a very, very violent man. So, talk about epigenetics. Did that violence go from my great grandfather to my grandpa Jack to my mother to me to my older son? Who had a violent streak. So I don't know, but I'm overwhelmed with awe when I think about what, like I said earlier, what our ancestors had to survive
Yes.
and the violence that they probably had to survive just so we could be here.
And we respond, unfortunately, that, we're desensitized on one level, but on the other level, violence shuts you down.
Yes. Yes. If you're the victim.
If you're the victim, it shuts you down, and then all kinds of insane things could be going on around you, and you don't have the skills, the strength, or anything to fight back.
Well,
Uh,
that's the thing is giving our children and grandchildren the skills
right.
right now to fight back. And there are so much learning available right now, either online or within the school districts. Um, all the parents have to do is look. How can I make my kid resilient? If you put that in Google, I'm sure a bunch of stuff comes up. How to raise
Absolutely.
a resilient child, that kind of stuff. And so, but I was raised with a very hands-off attitude, and that's how I raised my boys. My mother was very lucky that the three of us didn't get into any more trouble. That my brother, who was very angry, growing up, didn't get into law trouble, trouble with the law. I just think that right now we have the opportunity to teach middle schoolers and high schoolers about what to do to protect themselves. And if you're not feeling well, and if your mental health is on the downswing, you need to reach out.
Right. Just call somebody, anybody.
Mhm.
Stacey, thank you so much for your bravery and sharing your stories with the world. I want to say, what do you do presently right now, on a daily basis, to maintain healthy mental health? What are your go-to?
Depends on, I'm not a very good sleeper. I've had insomnia since I was about 12. So if I get a good night's sleep, I go to the gym, to that, or I go to the coffee shop at 5:30, 6 o'clock and write. I get like 3 or 4, that's my thing. If I get 3 or 4 hours of writing in the morning, I'm good. I still work a full-time job doing music cue sheets for production companies because I have to afford my writing life right
Yes,
now.
yes, absolutely.
And traveling and walking and spending time with my family and girlfriends and my husband is really important to me. And when I feel like I'm about, to do that, I kind of wait a couple days to make sure it's not like a menopause thing, because like I know the difference between menopause chemical brain and whatever.
Yes.
But I'll just take off and be by myself, and that
That's a
works.
whole nother show, which I think we should talk about at some point, is the
Okay.
menopause, the effect of it on our bodies.
Yeah.
Stacey, tell us, what do you like about getting older?
Then I don't take shit from anybody. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know if you're gonna have to bleep that out or not,
That's
but
okay. No.
yeah. I just don't. I say what's on my mind immediately.
Mhm.
Immediately, and
Right.
I never did that. I kept my mouth shut for so many years.
And I want to assure you that everything we're seeing through science and art and music and life is making life so much better for us as we get older. And
It
there's so much more to hope for. The old adage that, you reach a certain age and you put on orthopedic shoes and had to stay home.
mm,
And again, I don't come from a place of anti-aging at all, but I like to think it's never too late to find happiness. It's never too late to write a book. It's never too late to make a beautiful piece of art or share your joy with other people. And it's never too late to repair relationships.
mhm,
I can't say that enough. It may not be ideal and it may not be perfect and there may be some damage done, but it's never too late to find those hints and those glimmers of happiness in everything we do on a daily basis. Again, Stacey, thank you so much for sharing your story. And for more information about the book Empty Cupboards, go to www.staceypowells.com, STACEYPOWELLS.com. And you can also go to my website, which is patriciagreenberg.com, and I could forward the information. So thank you, Stacey, and thank you everybody for listening today.
thank you, Patricia.